don't even know it. Does this look like a man that's sick? Throw in whatever else the kids got, and that's all we own.
The differences I had with the producers of the show was that I felt too much emphasis was being put on JJ and his chicken hat and saying dynamite every third page. So they said, tell you what, why don't we him off and we'll all get on with our lives. Life's too short.
When John Amos was abruptly fired from Good Times in 1976, his character James Evans was killed in a car accident. But the real reason behind his dismissal remained hidden for decades, until now.
When Norman called me up one day, we were on hiatus, and he said, his secretary, J.D. Joe, called and said, John, Norman would like to speak to you. I said, sure, I'm here. I said, how's that? He said, well, we had to let you go, John. He said, we can't have you threatening the writers' lives, and the writers are getting nervous, and they're gonna have to let you go. Wish you the best of luck. I said, okay, Norm, bye.
To fans, Amos was the strong father figure holding the family together. But behind the scenes, the actor had repeatedly clashed with producers over salary negotiations and creative control.
Like I said, I wasn't the most diplomatic guy, so very often it would end in me saying, well, let's go outside then.
But what was the real breaking point? And why did it lead to his permanent removal from one of the most iconic black sitcoms of its time? Born in Newark, New Jersey in 1939, John Amos initially pursued professional football, signing with teams like the Kansas City Chiefs and Denver Broncos before injuries derailed his athletic aspirations. After small acting roles, including a recurring part as weatherman Gordie Howard on The Mary Tyler Moore Show, Amos landed what would become his signature role.
I put on a little weight.
I guess when you only got one mouth to feed, it's easy to eat good.
Good Times, premiering on CBS in February 1974, made television history as the first show to portray the full spectrum of a black family's life. As James Evans Sr., Amos brought a commanding presence to the screen as a character struggling to provide for his family while maintaining his dignity in Chicago's housing projects. For the first time, millions of Americans were seeing a black father portrayed with depth, strength, and complexity. A revolutionary step forward in a television landscape that had long relegated black characters to sidekicks and stereotypes. But behind the scenes, the atmosphere was far from revolutionary. The writer's room for Good Times, a show about the authentic black experience in America, was staffed entirely by white writers, a fact that would become a major source of friction as the show progressed. As Good Times gained popularity, a clear tension emerged between the show's artistic direction and what Amos believed the show should represent. At the center of this conflict was the character of J.J. Evans, played by Jimmy Walker, whose comedic antics and catchphrase, "Dynamite," quickly became the show's most recognizable element.
Pure dynamite!
While audiences embraced JJ's colorful personality and catchphrases, Amos grew increasingly frustrated with what he saw as the show leaning into stereotype rather than authentic representation. In a 2015 interview with the Archive of American Television, Amos laid bare his concerns, saying, "My early departure from the show, I felt that with two younger children, one of whom aspired to become a Supreme Court justice, that would be Ralph Carter, and the other, Bernadette Stannis, who aspired to become a surgeon. There was too much emphasis being put on JJ and his chicken hat saying, 'Dynamite,' every third page, when just as much emphasis and mileage could have been gotten out of my other two children."
I felt too much emphasis was being put on JJ and his chicken hat and saying dynamite every third page, when just as much emphasis and mileage could have been gotten out of my other two children.
For Amos, this wasn't just about screen time or story balance. It was about the broader implications of how black youth were being portrayed on national television. While Michael represented academic excellence and Thelma embodied ambitious career goals, JJ was increasingly pushed toward what Amos viewed as buffoonery. The frustration wasn't just that JJ was getting more attention. It was that his character was being developed in ways that Amos believed reinforced negative stereotypes about young black men. At a time when positive black representation on television was exceedingly rare, these concerns carried significant weight. Possibly the most explosive point of contention for Amos was the makeup of the writing staff. In an era where civil rights advances were still fresh and representation battles were being fought across American institutions, Good Times, a show explicitly about the black experience, had an entirely white writing team.
I felt like I knew more about what a black family should be and how a black father would act than our writers, none of whom were black.
The disconnect between the lived experiences of the black cast and the perspectives of the white writing team created an environment ripe for conflict. For Amos, who had grown up in Newark and East Orange, New Jersey, the writer's depictions of black family life often missed the mark of authenticity he believed viewers deserved. As the face of black fatherhood on the show, he felt a particular responsibility to push back against portrayals he considered inaccurate or harmful.
Throw in whatever else the kids got, and that's all we own.
The conflicts weren't limited to abstract disagreements about character development. According to Amos, there were specific scripts and storylines that he challenged on the grounds of authenticity and dignity. The writers, meanwhile, became increasingly frustrated with what they perceived as an actor overstepping his boundaries by questioning their creative decisions. As tensions escalated, the professional disagreements took on a more confrontational tone. By his own admission, Amos's approach to raising his concerns was far from diplomatic, a fact he would acknowledge in later interviews, with a mix of reflection and lingering conviction about the substance of his objections.
I wasn't the most diplomatic guy, so very often it would end in me saying, well, let's go outside.
The image of the former football player physically intimidating the writing staff with suggestions to take it outside paints a vivid picture of just how heated these creative disagreements had become. For writers accustomed to the polite conventions of Hollywood collaboration, Amos's confrontational style represented a shocking departure from business as usual. Being born in Newark, raised in East Orange, I had a way of voicing my differences against the script that weren't acceptable to the creative staff, Amos explained. I mean, the writers got tired of having their lives threatened over jokes. While Amos has maintained that his intentions were rooted in a desire for authentic representation, his methods of communication clearly crossed professional boundaries. The writers and producers, feeling physically threatened, eventually reached their breaking point. By the end of the third season, the situation had become untenable. The specific incident that finally led to Amos's dismissal has never been fully detailed publicly, but the culmination was clear. John Amos was fired from Good Times, with his character killed off in a car accident in what would become one of television's most shocking departures. I left because I was told that my services were no longer needed because I had become a disruptive element, Amos later explained, using the executive's language to describe his firing. The term disruptive element would stick with him throughout his career, a reminder of the consequences of his outspoken stance on authentic representation. The decision to kill off James Evans, rather than simply write him out of the show in a way that would allow for a potential return, spoke volumes about the finality of the break between Amos and the production. There would be no reconciliation, no guest appearances. James Evans was dead, and John Amos's time on Good Times was definitively over. For viewers, the sudden death of James Evans was shocking and emotionally devastating. The episodes dealing with the family's grief became iconic television moments. Ironically, some of the show's most powerful and authentic emotional moments came as a direct result of Amos's firing.
I was told after I was killed off of Good Times, you'll never work again. As God would have it, though, less than 6 or 7 months later, David Walper cast me as a part of the adult Kunta Kinte and Roots, and the rest, as they say, is history.
However, what's particularly revealing about the Good Times behind-the-scenes drama is that John Amos wasn't alone in his criticisms. Esther Rolle, who played matriarch Florida Evans, shared many of his frustrations about the show's direction and stereotypical portrayals, particularly regarding the JJ character.
Here I am!
Rolle's concerns were so serious that she temporarily left the series after the 4th season, returning only after receiving assurances that character dynamics would be adjusted. Her departure, coming shortly after Amos's firing, reinforced that the issues Amos had raised weren't simply one actor's grievances, but reflected deeper problems with the show's creative direction. "I told them I couldn't continue because it was a matter of integrity," Rolle said in interviews about her temporary departure. Like Amos, she felt the show was leaning too heavily on stereotypes rather than the authentic, dignified portrayal of a black family that had been promised when the show began. The fact that both adult leads independently raised similar concerns about the show's portrayal of black characters, particularly JJ, suggests that Amos's criticisms, however tactlessly delivered, had substantive merit. The show had indeed shifted from its original focus on a struggling but dignified family to increasingly center J.J. quote, as more stereotypical comedic antics. Despite their difficult parting, Amos and legendary producer Norman Lear would eventually find their way back to a working relationship. Years after the Good Times controversy, they collaborated on 3 additional pilots, suggesting that the respect between them had survived their creative differences.
Norman had his finger on the pulse of America, and he would listen. And for him to listen to me in those days, that was a tribute to his patience.
The full circle moment came in 2019, when Amos reunited with Lear for Live in Front of a Studio Audience, All in the Family and Good Times, a special live performance of classic episodes. This reconciliation, coming decades after their contentious split, suggests that both men had gained perspective on their earlier conflicts. For Amos, the principle of authentic representation remained important, but the passage of time had perhaps softened the emotions surrounding their creative battles. While John Amos's career continued long after Good Times, with notable roles in Roots, Coming to America, and The West Wing, among many others, his later years would be marked by troubling family controversies that played out in the public eye. In June 2023, at age 83, Amos found himself at the center of disturbing allegations when his daughter Shannon claimed he was a victim of elder abuse, neglect, and financial exploitation. In a surprising public statement, Shannon alleged that her father was being mistreated by a trusted caregiver, though she initially provided no specifics about who this caregiver might be. Shannon went so far as to create a GoFundMe campaign seeking $500,000 for her father to catch and prosecute the alleged perpetrators. She claimed to be working with law enforcement, including the Colorado Bureau of Investigation and the Custer County Sheriff's Office, to address what she described as serious mistreatment of her elderly father. In her public statements, Shannon painted a disturbing picture. "Our priority remains my father's medical needs and providing him a safe haven. His home had been violated, stripped of anything valuable." She described returning from travels to find her father fighting for his life in the ICU, a characterization that would soon be directly contradicted. In a stunning turn of events, John Amos himself appeared in a video shared by his son, Casey Amos, to refute his daughter's claims. The video presented a completely different narrative, one in which Shannon, not an unnamed caregiver, was the source of the problems. "I'm not in the hospital as a result of anything that happened recently," Amos stated firmly in the video. "About a month ago, I was hospitalized because I was suffering from water retention and a couple of other issues, all of which have been corrected or at least addressed." But the most explosive part of Amos's statement came next, as he directly accused his daughter of being the problem. "My main issues are, I feel like, prior to entering the hospital, I had some ongoing issues with my daughter, who I feel has taken advantage of me. She would be the primary suspect, if you would. She is the one that I would attribute my elderly abuse to." Amos's publicist, Belinda Foster, further clarified that the actor was doing well after being hospitalized with heart problems and that claims he was fighting for his life were ridiculous. Even more damning for Shannon's fundraising efforts, Foster stated, "He had no idea there was a GoFundMe put together by his daughter Shannon. He had no knowledge of it. He doesn't need a GoFundMe. He's doing well and he doesn't understand why she put this thing together." The public was now witnessing a deeply personal family dispute playing out in public statements, with father and daughter presenting completely contradictory narratives about his health and care. Rather than resolving, the family tensions only escalated in the months that followed Shannon's initial allegations and John Amos's shocking counterclaims. The public dispute between father and daughter soon expanded to include Casey Amos, John's son, creating a three-way family conflict that would play out in increasingly public and disturbing ways. By March 2024, the situation had deteriorated even further. Shannon returned to the public eye with fresh allegations, this time specifically targeting her brother Casey's care of their father. In detailed social media posts that quickly spread across entertainment news outlets, Shannon claimed that Casey was neglecting their father's medical needs and isolating him from other family members who genuinely cared about his welfare. "My father's health continues to decline under my brother's so-called care," Shannon wrote in one particularly explosive post. "Basic medical appointments are being missed, prescriptions aren't being filled, and family members who love him are being systematically blocked from communicating with him." These allegations painted a disturbing picture of an elderly man being denied proper care in his twilight years. Sources close to Shannon claimed that John Amos was often left alone for extended periods, sometimes without proper food or medication, while Casey pursued his own interests. They alleged that medical professionals had expressed concerns about John's care, but that Casey had restricted access to his father, making outside intervention difficult. But once again, John Amos himself would publicly contradict these claims. In a written statement released through his publicist, Amos emphatically denied that he was being neglected or mistreated by his son. "I am well cared for and all my needs are being met." These allegations are not only false, but deeply hurtful to me and to my son, who has been nothing but attentive and loving. The statement went on to suggest that Shannon's continued public allegations were motivated by financial interests rather than genuine concern for his welfare. "My daughter's continued attempts to insert herself into my care arrangements appear to be motivated by considerations other than my well-being," the statement read, though it stopped short of explicitly accusing Shannon of financial exploitation. The already volatile family situation took an even darker turn in July 2024, when court records revealed that Casey Amos had been arrested after allegedly threatening to kill Shannon. According to the complaint obtained by entertainment news outlets, Casey had sent his sister a series of increasingly menacing text messages culminating in explicit death threats, accompanied by photos of firearms and references to gang connections. These weren't vague or ambiguous threats, a source close to Shannon revealed. "We're talking about explicit messages saying, 'I'm going to kill you,' alongside pictures of guns. Anyone would have been terrified." The legal document stated that Shannon believed the immediacy of the threat and the likelihood that it would be carried out was significant enough to fear for her life and seek immediate legal protection. Law enforcement apparently agreed, as Casey was taken into custody and formally charged, though he would later be released on bail pending trial. K.C's legal team would later claim that the messages had been taken out of context and that Shannon had selectively shared portions of their exchanges that painted his communications in the worst possible light. They suggested the siblings had been engaged in heated exchanges for months, with provocations on both sides. The irony was impossible to ignore. While millions of Americans remembered John Amos as James Evans, the strong, dignified patriarch who held his family together through poverty and hardship on good times, His real-life family was publicly disintegrating in a spiral of accusations, counter-accusations, and now alleged death threats. The dignity and unity that characterized the fictional Evans family couldn't have been further from the reality of the Amos family's bitter divisions.
Tributes are pouring in for John Amos, best known for his starring role in Good Times and the TV miniseries Roots. Amos passed away at 84.
Following John Amos's death in August 2024, the family divisions became even more pronounced in public. Shannon expressed devastation upon learning about her father's passing through media reports 45 days after the fact, suggesting she had been completely cut off from information about her father in his final days. She and other family members voiced concerns about potential foul play, citing elder abuse and isolation by caregivers. Their allegations specifically implicated KC, suggesting he had controlled his father's communications and portrayed a false narrative on social media about Amos's well-being in his final months. The implications were serious, that John Amos had been isolated from certain family members, that his care had been inadequate, and that there were suspicious circumstances surrounding his death that warranted investigation. KC firmly denied these allegations, insisting his father died of natural causes and that no abuse had taken place. He presented himself as his father's devoted caretaker, suggesting that Shannon's allegations were motivated by factors other than genuine concern for their father's welfare. The Amos family's internal disputes had now reached the point where even the circumstances of John Amos's death were being questioned and disputed by his own children, with accusations of potential foul play hanging in the air. The legacy of John Amos extends far beyond the characters he portrayed. His career was marked by groundbreaking roles, from James Evans to the adult Kunta Kinte in Roots, to Admiral Percy Fitzwallace on The West Wing. That helped reshape how black men were portrayed on television. But equally important was his behind-the-scenes advocacy for authentic representation, even when that advocacy came at great personal cost. In an era when black actors were often expected to be grateful for any roles they received and not to challenge the creative decisions of predominantly white production teams, Amos was willing to speak up, however imperfectly. The conflicts that defined much of his professional and personal life, from contentious writers' room battles to public family disputes, reveal a complex individual who consistently chose confrontation over silent acceptance when faced with situations he found unacceptable. This willingness to engage in conflict, even when it carried significant costs, is perhaps as much a part of his legacy as any character he portrayed on screen. John Amos may have been fired for being a disruptive element, but in his disruption, he challenged television to be better, more authentic, and more respectful of the communities it portrayed. A challenge that continues to resonate in Hollywood today. Anyway, that's it for this video, folks. Bye.